Hey everybody, welcome back to coverage of MXP Tacoma, the modern 20K headliner. We have four slots to give out to the regional championship in Atlanta coming up in December. And Noah, that means only one more round to decide those slots because we're in the top eight now.
This, top eight match is going to matter so much more than your typical top eight match. A lot of times, you, your goal is after you make it to top eight, you're feeling good. You can do whatever. The pressure is on once again for all eight of these players, right? They are playing for these four very precious regional championship invites. So, going to be really exciting match to get to cover. Going to be really cool to see what happens.
Yeah, for sure. So huge accomplishment already to these players just to have navigated such a large and challenging field to make it this far. But this match is big, especially for the players who really want to go to the regional championship who might not have a qualification already. This is a big one. But we're also not going to quit there because we have a lot of money on the line. So we're going to bring you the whole top eight. We're going to play down to one winner, and it's going to be great. Noah, I'm pretty excited about the way things shook out. We have, I believe, six distinct archetypes in the top eight, even seven if you count, the structural differences between our two Omnath players. But we're going to continue following Ian Friedman, who was undefeated after day one, locked up top seed after the Swiss rounds. He is playing mono black mid range. We've been loving this on camera all weekend. And then before we get to the game, I'll just mention that this is uh, what you expect of a top eight playoff where the higher seed after the Swiss gets to go first in each round, which is pretty substantial advantage in modern.
Yeah, I mean, totally. Ian Friedman really showing us, day one undefeated, day two still crushing everything, really wanting that first seed, and it mattering so much when the play draw rule is in effect. So I think that's going to be really important, especially for his mono black mid range deck against these Rakdos Evoke decks, because a lot of times when you're playing Rakdos Evoke, you're going to spend the first turn maybe playing a grief, trying to Undying Evil it, maybe even playing a Ragavan. So getting to go first if you're Ian here is just huge for your deck. His deck's a little bit slower, a little bit more focused on these value plans. So not having to worry about Bradley really coming out of the gates for this first game is going to be incredibly important for Ian.
I like this matchup from Ian Friedman's side. You could think about this mono black mid range deck as sort of like half of a Rakdos scam deck. It has a little bit of the same flavorings in terms of Thoughtseize, Orcish Bowmasters, removal spells, and it does have four Grief and four Malakir Rebirth to give Ian Friedman access to that scam draw if he's fortunate enough to have those cards. However, I would consider this like the bread and butter Magic 101 of a pseudo mirror match wanting to be on the bigger side with more card advantage. And that's what Ian Friedman has because he has the four drops. He's got the four one rings. He's got the four Shouldreds. So he has similar advantage or, similar plays available to him in the early turns. But when things go long, I think he's just set up with all the best top decks. There's Castle Lock Twains. So particularly with that die roll advantage, being able to get through the early turns on even footing, I like Ian's position here.
I completely agree with you, especially when you take a look at Bradley's list and you realize, hey, how many answers do I even have to resolve Shieldred? Well, quickly looking through just these two copies of Terminate. You know,
Wow, that's a great point. I didn't even have that on my radar.
Yeah, I mean, luckily, he's got these four copies of Thoughtseize. He could always, play a Grief, maybe use a Feign Death, get rid of one of these Shieldreds that way. But a resolved Shieldred for Ian is such a huge game in this sort of matchup, unless he's able to string together an Orcish Bowmasters plus a Fury, or, two Furies, or two Lightning Bolts or something, Terminate is the only clean answer that Bradley has access to.
Yeah, and you talked about, Thoughtseize and Grief, and that's all fine and good, but there's four One Rings and four Shouldreds. That's a lot of pressure on your Thoughtseizes and Griefs, not to mention things just going long coming down to top decks.
Totally, yeah. There's just so many cards that Ian has in this sort of matchup that are going to be really impactful for him. And taking a quick look at Bradley's hand with this Thoughtseize, he's drawn one of his worst cards in the matchup in Blood Moon, right? Ian has tons of basic lands in his deck. So this Blood Moon in his hand is essentially already as if he had taken a mulligan.
Yeah, it's funny. The Blood Moon is about as likely to hurt Bradley as it is to hurt Ian. Ian, I think just literally has 3 swamps in play, or at least 2 at this point.
Yeah, and I mean, it's not like his, while being a mono black deck, it's not like it's all that color hungry. I think he has 2 basic swamps and then just played a Malakir Rebirth tapped as a land. So just having those 2 black sources is going to be enough if you're Ian, right? You don't need to use 3 black mana in one turn unless you're doing something very very mana hungry. So it's looking like the Blood Moon not really coming to play at all this game for Bradley.
To answer a question from chat, Ian Friedman's deck is not a Cabal Coffers deck. It's a mid-range black deck in the truest sense of the word. He's really focused on hitting his stride around that 4 mana mark.
Yeah, just not really worried about trying to go over the top with his mono black deck. Just focusing really on these potent 4 drops in the One Ring and Shieldred, and being like, hey, if I make it to 4 mana this game, I bet you I could take over the game just with these 2 cards, which I really like and really respect about the way the deck is built.
And if you just look at Ian Friedman's hand, you kind of see how well he has constructed his deck to match up against Rakdos. Just Bowmasters, kill your Bowmasters and produce 2 blockers to make your Ragavan effectively a dead card. Now frees up the Knight's Whisper, that represents card advantage. His hand is just stacked with Shouldreds and One Rings. And Bradley Brown, having missed his opportunity to get that quick scam win, it's like, attack you for 2 with my Orc army. Maybe I can get you down to 13. It's going to be a tough road for Bradley this game.
Definitely, we've definitely sort of passed the first couple turn window that Bradley had to really press the advantage of the way that his deck was built in this matchup. And we're really coming into, the wheelhouse of where Ian was looking to play, hey, I've got all of these 4-cost cards that are super duper effective and I want to get them down. And it's looking like he has 4 mana. His life total is at a high enough, state where he's not just worried about the game ending in one turn, from something scary. So he has a little bit of cushion, and he also has some really, really effective cards in his hand.
Ian opting to trade Bowmasters plus token against 2/2 token. I really like the way he's respecting his life total. That does leave the path clear for Ragavan, although we know that Ian's going to play a 4 mana spell that will, at least on a temporary basis, stop the Ragavan from connecting.
Yeah, I don't mind the block. I like that Ian is really prioritizing his life total, but especially if his plan was just to play the One Ring here. I could have liked him seeing him going down to 8, 10 and 8, really similar life totals here. And it also does kind of instantly shut off the Castle Lockswain that Bradley looked like he was planning on using. If Ian just decides, hey, I'm going to sit back with my Orcish Bowmasters, Bradley really can't activate Castle Lockswain without his Ragavan dying for free.
Yeah, so really valuing just the actual passive ability of Bowmasters. That makes sense.
Yeah, I'd say this turn 5 Grief not looking so good. Oh, One Ring
Grief,
trigger.
Grief just not doing anything besides being a 4 mana 3/2. That's like casting a Bloodbraid Elf and cascading into a useless card.
Yeah, not ideal here if you're Bradley, especially not now that Ian has, his 1-2 punch combo, it's in play. Children plus the ring, really showing the power of his deck, really, taking the downside of this One Ring where you're going to be losing life at all of your upkeep and making it not so bad, every activation, Ian is actually just gaining life.
Yeah, that's right, Noah. This is it. This is the payoff. You know, the way you get to playing this mono black mid range deck is you ask yourself, well, what's the most exciting card in the format? It's the One Ring. Now, what's the best way to take the greatest advantage of the One Ring? Well, it's having Shieldred on the battlefield that both supercharges your own One Rings and stops any opponents from using One Ring themselves.
Yeah, I love it. It's like almost like a Karn the Great Creator that is like a little bit more aggressive leaning, deals a bit more damage as and gains a bit more life. I really like the 4 copies of Shieldred. Really smart deck building here from Ian, and it's working incredibly well. As we saw him undefeated on day one, the 1 seed going into top 8, just really came prepared for this tournament. Yeah, as I was saying a little bit earlier, just with Bradley only having these 2 copies of Terminate, we've gotten to the board state that is scary. The Shieldred's in play. There's a One Ring in play. Like, if Bradley doesn't find an answer for the Shieldred in the next, I would say, this turn, I think the game might be over. But that's looking like a Terminate to me.
Wow. All right, the game continues. I mean, that doesn't, let's not overstate it. That doesn't put Bradley in a winning position, but it does allow him to keep playing. Like, now there's at least a path that he can walk down.
Totally. And I mean, Ian could brick for a while on these One Rings, but he's got 2 extra copies in his hand, so he doesn't actually have to worry about taking much damage from the counters that are on this first copy of the One Ring. He could just cast a second one to replace it. And also, the protection that the One Ring gives him for all these turns, it matters a lot. It shuts off any of the hand interaction cards that are in Bradley's deck. So just chaining together these One Rings turn after turn is going to be so effective for Ian's game plan that he might just, wind up with enough cards in his hand that there's no way for Bradley to claw back.
Right. I mean, imagine this turn, he draws 3 off his existing One Ring. He Legend Rules with a new One Ring, and then just never even activates that again for the rest of the game. Now he's going to be sitting pretty at a pretty reasonable life total. He's going to be invulnerable for a turn, not have to worry about that grief, and he's just so far ahead on cards that, I mean, it's not a logical leap to envision Ian winning just with the resources he has now. But of course, if you're not satisfied, you could just keep drawing more cards with the One Ring.
Yeah, I mean, if you're Ian, you're thinking, what's 1 life really? I'm at 8, 8 and 7, no diff. I got another One Ring for next turn. This turn I want to draw 1. Next turn I'll draw 2. Play another copy of the One Ring. Maybe I'll draw 1 then. I can reevaluate. Next turn. Possibly, let's say I picked up a Shieldred. Basically, just back at it again.
Bottom line is the hearts of men are easily corrupted. Few can resist the call of the One Ring. Just one more card, just one more activation.
Just a card. Like, yeah, how bad could it be?
Wow, so I'm not sure I've ever seen a game where 2 griefs both failed to trigger on the opponent. That's just miserable from Bradley's perspective.
Yeah, brutal here for Bradley, right? Those griefs, that's the sort of card that he was looking for on turn 1, possibly, maybe paired with an Undying Malice or something, That is not the sort of card that he wants to be drawing when his opponent is playing Shieldreds, when his opponent is playing the One Rings, Ian just slamming good card after good card, and all Bradley's got is a grief, no targets,
For what it's worth, Ian does have to address these in some way. The six power worth of menace is pretty difficult to block, and he can't be totally reckless with his life total. He's got to kill these creatures. He's got to play another One Ring, or he's got to produce a lot of blockers. He should be able to do one of those three things, but he has to actually do it.
Yeah, I mean that's a really good point, Reed. You know, like he could Ian can draw as many cards as he wants this game, but if the cards that he's playing are not, you know, more copies of the One Ring, a bunch of removal spells for the creatures that Bradley's producing, you know, possibly an extra copy of Shieldred, then this game could be, you know, not as much of a blowout as it seems.
All right, so he killed one Grief. He cannot block the existing one, so he's going to take another chunk of life here.
This is so surprising to see because I'm pretty sure he had a copy of the One Ring in his hand, right? And am I mistaken, or would Ian just be dead to a lightning bolt here? 3 damage from the Grief, 3 damage from the bolt, 2 damage from the One Ring trigger.
Yeah, he would have an opportunity in his upkeep to take actions, but I don't think this mono black deck would have any way to survive at instant speed.
So, but it is the top 8, right? They do have access to open deck lists, I assume. Ian is aware that Bradley's list only has 2 copies of Lightning Bolt. So I think he's feeling a little bit more confident in playing around with, you know, exactly, you know, the limits of how far his deck could be.
Bradley Brown down to 5. Ian Friedman down to 4. Scheduled to take 2 more from this One Ring. Eesh, that's dicey. Oh, Brad head Bowmaster, so he was just going, oh, please let Ian start his turn by activating that One Ring and let me steal this one. I mean, he came close, man. That for a game that looked totally out of reach, he was effectively 1 life point away from taking that one off Ian Friedman. But it is our mono black mid range player who takes game number 1 there.
Yeah, I mean, there we saw Ian really, you know, using his life total as a resource, taking it all the way down to possibly being at only 1 life, but just really, you know, gaining card advantage almost every single turn of the game. You know, he started it off with an early Night's Whisper, and Brad just kind of doing mopey stuff for the first couple turns of the game. You know, he had a Thoughtseize, yeah, like that's pretty good interaction, but he needs something a little bit better against Ian's mono black mid range deck to actually win the game. You know, I think going into these post board games, it's going to get a little bit better. You know, if you're Bradley, right? Game 1 has to be the worst game for you. You have these 2 Blood Moons in your deck that do basically nothing, and then post board, you know, you get a couple more answers to the problematic cards from Ian's deck. You know, you get this extra copy of Terminate. You know, you have Colgan's Command. You know, it doesn't exactly kill the One Ring, but it is a really good 2-for-1. You know, as many cards as Brad can add to his deck that are just effective throughout the course of the game. It's gonna really help play against this mono black midrange deck.
So if you're on the Rakdos side, how do you envision yourself winning? What are you trying to do?
I mean, it's for me, it definitely feels like you're gonna want one of your more typical scam draws to win, right? Like maybe, you know, turn 1 Grief plus a Feigned Death or an Undying Malice. You know, follow that up with either a Ragavan or like a turn 3 Fable of the Mirrorbreaker. You know, I think that the most important cards in Bradley's deck are going to be, you know, either these scam aspects or then, you know, the cards that give him a little bit more value, like the Fable of the Mirrorbreaker, like a possible Fury. But I think more than anything else, you know, he's going to need to get the game going and get it going really quickly. You know, he can't sit around and just cast discard spells and hope that is enough to interact with Ian. He needs to be applying pressure with creatures and have some hand disruption. His deck needs to be firing on all cylinders to fight against Ian's deck, because clearly Ian built his deck with these Rakdos Evoke decks in mind. He has tons of interaction with his creatures. He has 4 Fatal Push, really good removal spells. So it's not going to be an easy road for Bradley, but I think that he could certainly do it.
All right, let's talk mulligan decisions. If you are playing Rakdos Scam in this matchup, is it the type of matchup where you're happy with lands and spells, or are you like, it's a bad matchup, I gotta have the Grief Scam on turn 1? Anything else special that you're looking for?
I mean, I think that it is one of the tough decisions that Bradley is going to have, because he can't necessarily, he can't just mulligan a hand that isn't explosive enough in hopes that his hand is perfect. He might be forced to keep a hand that isn't exactly perfect. I guess he just needs to make sure that he has a good number of threats as well as a hand disruption. Last game we saw he just had turn 1 Thoughtseize, turn 2 kind of do nothing. His hand was looking a little bit too lackluster. Here he's going to need, especially on the play, these Ragavans are really good. I could see him maybe boarding out some just because it's not great against Orcish Bowmasters, but this has to be the best game for his Ragavan. And you also kind of want to pressure your opponent's Orcish Bowmasters, right? Because you have your own, there's only so many cards that it can kill. So I wouldn't be surprised to see, Brad looking to keep a hand that just sort of, has some removal spells like Terminate or something, as well as maybe a discard spell, and then just some creatures.
Well, let's see what he's got. He is satisfied with his 7-card hand, and action right away.
I think I might have seen a Grief and a Feign Death in there, Reed.
Okay, that's the dream start. I mean, this is the thing about the Rakdos Scam deck, is no matter how unfavorable the matchup might be on paper, if you have this draw, you could beat anyone.
Totally.
All right, let's have a look at this hand. I see 2 lands, Fatal Push, Murderous Cut, Shieldred, Double Grief. Thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really strong hand if you're in a lot of really good cards. If I'm incorrect in assuming that Bradley did in fact have this Feign Death, it's looking like he will probably just go about taking the Fatal Push and then the Murderous Cut, and not really caring about these griefs that are in Ian's hand. Once he has this turn 1 grief in play, it's already going to be super potent at possibly ending the game. And it kind of leaves Ian in a sort of scenario where, yeah, he's got these 2 lands, yeah, he's got this Shieldred, but he needs to draw a removal spell for this grief, or the game is going to end.
Okay, so the plan is attack 5 times with a 4/3 menace, leave Ian with this clunky stuff, leave Ian with these cards that do not impact the board. Though he did actually respect the Shieldred and left Ian with Fatal Push, which it's not necessarily trivial for Ian to achieve Revolt and kill off the Grief. I take that back.
Right, because he left the grief, right? So that's the thing. That's the thing about Bradley's line. He kind of went a little bit halfway in between, right? He took one of the removal spells, left one of the removal spells, left both of the griefs. So, but what Ian is able to do here, right, is use that grief, get the evoke trigger, and as you see Bradley nodding his head, that's where the evoke trigger comes in. He wasn't even realizing that, oh, Ian has an easy way to trigger Revolt on this Fatal Push. So I think that was a little bit of a misstep from him, not exactly, realizing how the next turn would play out. But it could be worse, right? He still has this removal in his hand. The board state is kind of even.
Yeah, I think you said it, Noah. It was just like taking a middle path rather than moving clearly along the lines of one particular strategy. And it's not like it's some kind of boneheaded play. Like Bradley took two good cards from Ian Friedman's hand. It was just he took a mix of cards such that he didn't get the easy win with the grief. So maybe he's regretting that. But the game goes on, and we're just going to see which player can top deck better. What I said last game was that I think this is a position where Ian Friedman's deck is favored based on all those powerful 4 mana cards. But favored is just a word. What actually happens is what actually happens. You can
That
have a
is
slightly weaker
certainly
deck and definitely still out top deck the opponent.
that is so true, Reed. So true. You know, it's just numbers on paper at some point. You know, we got to let the cards speak for themselves.
Also, really cool to see to get a little insight in Ian Friedman's sideboard plan for the matchup. After keeping the opening hand, his first draw step was Leyline of the Void, which is usually like a big, a big sigh kind of moment. But he was able to pitch it to the grief to good effect. Now he just hard casts a Leyline of the Void and then draws the One Ring, and his deck is firing on all cylinders.
I mean, if you're Bradley, the One Ring is basically the worst possible card you could see from Ian. It's just going to provide Ian with so many cards over these coming turns. But resolving this Fury, having this Dottie Voidwalker in play, that clock is just a 2-turn clock. Ian, yeah, he's going to get a lot of draw steps. What, two here, one on his draw step next turn, and then 3 from the ring. So that's about like 6-7 cards to find some sort of answer. But the pressure that Bradley's putting on is nothing to laugh at. This double striking Fury, tons of damage. This Dottie Voidwalker, hard to block. And just looking at Ian's draws this turn, nothing. Just 2 lands and a Malakir Rebirth in hand. He is going to be taking 9 next turn, going down to 8. He has a fetch land in play. If he sacks that, that's 7. 2 damage from the One Ring. At most on his following turn, he's going to be at 6 life.
Yeah, I mean, 1 hit for 9 damage, that could just be enough. Even if Ian finds answers to the creatures, now it's like you're at 8 and you have a lot of pressure to continue activating your One Ring. You might just die from the burden counters. So once again, a game that looked kind of far gone, but is actually a lot closer than meets the eye.
And I think that really goes to show the power of this Rakdos Evoke deck, right? He had turn 1, to double grief. But since then, Ian's turns have been super strong, and he's been able to follow it up with good answers, good interaction. Yet Bradley's still in the game.
All right, the game is likely to, well, I was going to say likely to be determined in this turn cycle, but I'm actually going to walk that back. This is going to be a big turn cycle to set us down a path, but Ian needs to find something here and answer these creatures, and then we'll see what happens. We'll see if Bradley can find some direct damage. We'll see if Ian Friedman can find a way to not die to his own One Ring.
Yeah,
First, it all comes down to this.
Totally agree. Unless, a Shieldred comes into play soon, some of these removal spells, just taking a quick look at Ian's list, he does not actually have a great way to answer multiple of these creatures at once. His list isn't really the sort of mono black control list that you'd see that's focused on cards like Damnation. He's got a couple Murderous Cuts, he's got a couple, Fatal Pushes, but not too much in his deck that can answer all this at once.
Well, we picked up Fatal Push. That's a great start. Oh, and Shouldred. He would have loved that to be the draw step, so he could have gained 6 off the One Ring. But hey, we take that.
Yeah, Shouldred, a really good blocker here. Fatal Push the perfect interaction spell for him to have. It doesn't exactly finish off this Fury, which is not great if you're in Ian's spot, but being able to answer the Dottie Voidwalker also very important. You don't necessarily want to trade your Shieldred for Fury. Shieldred.
Yeah, so is that what's going to happen? Like, is he going to have to block with the Shieldred?
I mean, as is, it's looking like it, right? His life total is just so low.
So here, down to 4, up to 8, down to 7 to fetch with the Polluted Delta, kill off the Dothy Voidwalker.
Yeah, I mean, I
And then
suppose
I guess you could uh maybe block the Goblin Shaman, go to 1, and then try to make something cool happen in your upkeep. It's playing with fire though.
yeah, tough. Luckily, though, if you're Ian, yeah, Bradley has this Fable, but doesn't have that many cards in hand. In fact, he has none. So he won't be able to effectively use the loot very much. He's just gonna have the one card to loot. So going down to 1 here, it's scary, but might be the correct play. The real question, though, is if you're Ian and Bradley decides not to use
I
this
was
Fable
just
Mirror
thinking
Breaker at
that.
all.
Yeah, if Bradley shows some strength with his card. Okay, but he does cycle.
Yeah, and now comes the interesting decision for Ian, right? You know for a fact that your opponent did not like, what they drew for their turn. Is this one card going to kill you if you decide not to block Fury?
Yeah, so it's not Terminate, right? It could be Orcish Bowmasters, could be Lightning Bolt. Those are kind of the next most relevant ones. And just to backtrack, what happens if Ian does go to 1 is he's going to untap. He's going to have a triggered ability from the One Ring to lose 3 life, but he's going to respond to that by drawing 4 cards and gaining 8. So that's what we mean by taking some action in his upkeep and getting out of range. But that all depends on surviving this turn. And we're gonna see what Ian's made of. Is he a gambler, or is he just gonna trade off that Shieldred right now?
The problem with, just blocking the Fury and going to 5, this One Ring's still going to deal him 3 damage, put him down to 2 life. And then, unless he finds another copy of Shieldred, or another copy of the One Ring, he's in trouble anyways. He's not out of the water just by surviving this turn, trading the Shieldred for the Fury. I think, I wouldn't say I'm a greedy player, but I'm a gutsy player. I one life, that's plenty. That's enough to survive. I am just gonna, I'm blocking this 2/2.
Okay, so let's walk through it. If Bradley has a Lightning Bolt, you're gonna be dead regardless, because even if the Shieldred survives, Bradley can bolt you uh in your I'm sorry, even if you block the Fury, Bradley can bolt you and you'll die to the One Ring trigger. So the main card where blocking the Fury would make a difference is Orcish Bowmasters. And there it is, Noah. He's making your play. He's blocking the 2/2. He's going to 1 life. Oh, and it was Orcish
It's Orcish
Bowmasters.
Bowmasters. There's
Unreal. Wow.
No way.
The one card that kind of slams the door when Ian Friedman makes that play. But I like it. I think we talked through it. It was just a freshly drawn card. It's really difficult to have any information, or any hints or any feelings about what could be in Bradley's hand. And I think as you walked us through, like, that was just the play that was going to result in winning the game more often. So I like what Ian Friedman decided to do, but sometimes you make a judgment call that's totally sound and makes sense, and it just doesn't line up well against what your opponent has.
I think that's one of the toughest parts about Magic is like being brave enough to continue to make these plays that, they might seem a little risky, but they put you in a position to not only survive a game, but to win a game, especially when you get punished by, the one card that your opponent could have to kill you. So really brave play there by Ian. Didn't end up paying off for him, but a nice win there from Bradley. The game was not looking so good for him. He was able to turn things around and drew exactly the card that he needed on the last turn of the game. So really impressive stuff there. Yeah, just you love to see that.
Yeah, and a key play of that game was tap 5 lands, play Fury, go. That's not the normal case use for that card, but it was totally appropriate given the circumstances, and it led to Bradley winning the game.
Definitely. Yeah, I think really what made Ian decide to go for, what I would say is a little bit more of the riskier line there was looking at his hand and realizing, my hand is just filled with a bunch of not very good cards already. I've got some lands, I have this Malachir Rebirth, nothing is going on for me. I need to take this risk for my Shielder to survive, because I think that's the best card in his deck in this matchup for sure.
Well, we are back to effectively square one when it comes to Ian Friedman getting to go first, having what we believe is a at least a modest structural advantage in terms of the deck lists. But as we've seen from, honestly, both of these games, you got to get out there and play the cards because weird stuff can happen, and do not count the Rakdos Evoke deck out, even if it looks a little bit sketchy on paper.
Definitely, the deck is nicknamed Scam for a reason. It will take all the cards out of your hand, beat you down with a 4/3 that you can't really block. It will, just say, hey, I don't believe that you have any removal spell in your hand that can handle this Fury. I'm gonna put a 4/4 double striker in play, and over the course of the next 3 turns, if you don't have anything, you're dead. There is just a lot of really risky lines that Bradley can take with this Rakdos Evoke deck that can be really, really lucrative. They could pay off well. So I'm excited to see how this third game goes. I think, definitely, as I said before, Ian building his deck with this Rakdos Evoke deck in mind. He's on the play. He's got to be feeling at least pretty good with his odds of doing well. But as we also mentioned, you can never count out the Rakdos Scam deck.
How do you feel about these ley lines?
Honestly, I don't love them, but I get it. You are trying to shut off, Bradley's best draws, right? But in the same token, you're playing this deck that is just like a ton of individually good cards. You're planning on going later. I imagine there is just a large number of hands that Ian feels comfortable keeping in this matchup that have nothing to do with a ley line. So it makes me a little wary, like how many ley lines do I want to bring in? Am I going to be mulliganing to them aggressively? Am I going to keep hands anyways that don't have ley lines? So like I'll be drawing into them later when I'm looking for, these Shieldreds, when I'm looking for these the One Rings. So I could.
Yeah, that's what happened in game 2, right? He drew a couple ley lines after the opening hand.
Yeah, totally. And it looked like he would be winning anyways, but they wound up not being very good. The second ley line especially. The first one he had a grief to pitch it to, no problem. The second one he cast, but it didn't end up shutting off anything that Bradley had to do. Other than the first couple turns of the game, Bradley doesn't use his graveyard very often.
So I did catch Ian opened on a hand that had only one Field of Ruin as the only land. He threw that one back. Now he's looking at this 6-card hand, and oh man, he's going down to 5. Other side of the table, Bradley Brown has kept 7. So, the fan favorite player, Ian Friedman, who has led the tournament for most of the event, he's now facing elimination. He's got his back against the wall.
Yeah, I mean, we would hate to see, Ian's incredible run ending here due to the back of a mulligan to 5, but, his first hand just not very functioning. Second hand, 5 lands, Shieldred, Night's Whisper. I think he just decided this is not enough to deal with any of Bradley's, more aggressive draws. If he has the turn 1 Ragavan, if he has a Grief backed up by, something else. So, hey, I might be going to 5 cards, but it's going to give me a better shot of winning. That's what Ian thinks, at least.
Yeah, I would have kept that personally, but I certainly see the fear of, this is just not going to beat any of Bradley Brown's best hands.
Yeah, I was kind of thinking the same thing. I would lean towards keeping just because Shieldred's one of our best cards. This Night's Whisper can kind of give us back some cards, but in the same token, it loses to just a lot of hands with single discard spells or just early game creatures. So I think Ian just a little bit scared of the possibilities.
So now he's looking at almost the same hand, right? It's just a bunch of lands and a Night's Whisper, but now with one fewer card.
Yeah, this one's going to be a shrug keep. No, not
Yeah,
4.
I don't think I can co-sign this mulligan strategy. Like on 7, you can have some high standards and look for something. Once I've already mulliganed, 2 lands and Night's Whisper on the play, that's enough for me, regardless of what the other cards are.
Completely agree with you, Reed. It's too tough to expect to find any sort of hand that is better than just some extra redraws, some lands. So.
Yeah, and then there's this whole dynamic of like, well, I don't want to keep this hand because I can get Thought Seized and lose my Night's Whisper. But then what 4-card hand is going to be strong against a turn 1 Thought Seize and a good mix of lands and spells? That it doesn't really work that way.
Yeah, exactly. You kind of trick yourself into thinking like, yeah, I need specific cards to beat their best hands, but you're giving yourself less options to even have specific cards. So, or cards in general. So his own one Grief, Malkia Rebirth. He's like, I've gone down so low. Maybe this is my one shot to outscam
that
the
would be
scammer.
all 4 cards, right? Swamp, Grief, Valkyrie Rebirth, black card. That would certainly be the best he could hope for.
Oh, it's looking like just a Night's Whisper again. It's like, yeah, this mulligan, this 6-card mulligan, just almost coming back to haunt Ian. Didn't end up finding any of the sideboard cards he was looking for. Every subsequent hand also just was like, nothing too impressive, a Night's Whisper and some lands. This hand, however, though, he does have 2 lands, looking like what he's deciding to keep is 2 lands, a Night's Whisper, and then that Orcish Bowmaster. So
yeah, totally
this hand has a little more interaction.
And I see Night's Whisper as being one of the best cards you could have in a low resource situation like this, especially since Ian is on the play, so gets it in underneath Orcish Bowmasters. And yeah, I mean, two lands, Night's Whisper, and a backup play. That's as good as you could ask for. And depending on what Bradley does on turn number 1 here, if it's Thoughtseize or Grief or something else, Ian could very much be in the game. I mean, maybe Bradley plays a Ragavan, Friedman shoots it out of the sky with Orcish Bowmaster, and that's a pretty good opening sequence for him.
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly what all the Ian fans out there are hoping for. But I think Bradley, oh yeah, might have a discard spell. I mean, that's just so brutal. Already down to 4 cards. Turn 1, another card leaving. It's gonna be so tough here on out for Ian.
Yeah, so for what it's worth, Ian was kind of right in his previous mulligan decisions in that, if you kept a hand that was really dependent on Night's Whisper, it would have gotten stripped away from you. But yeah, I think the bottom line is kind of there's maybe just no winning against that set of circumstances. Hey, Castle Locked, Wayne, that's a great way to dig out from a mulligan, especially if Bradley happens to have a pretty slow draw.
Yeah, I mean, looking like a planned mulligan here. This way, the Castle Lockthwain dealing a little bit less damage when he draws cards off of it.
Also, look at the way both players are holding Orcish Bowmasters, and they're both trying to like level the other. You know, nobody's just playing out the Bowmasters to sit on the battlefield exposed. They're trying to wait and get maximum value. Bowmasters, your Bowmaster, have the last one standing. That's what it's all about.
Ian lost the chicken fight. No, he decided, yeah, I want to get this Bowmasters out here to not get taken away by the grief. But I'm not so sure I love it. You know, if okay, listen, Shieldred has to be one of the best chances for Ian to get back into this game. If Brad decides, you know, hey, I don't want to take your a Shieldred from your hand, you have to be feeling pretty good as Ian. You know, like yeah, maybe you know he's gonna have a Terminator or something, but if I draw my fourth land and get the Shieldred in play, he's gonna need to have an answer for all of my forecast threats. So a little bit surprised here to see, you know, Ian pull the trigger on that Orcish Bowmasters.
So an interesting point made in chat. If you put Bradley on having a feigned death, then you risk losing both of your cards if you don't respond with Bowmasters. So you could very well be right, Noah, in terms of like, you know, you want to play for the good case scenario when things are already going really poorly, but yeah, against that exact pattern of grief plus feign death, you need to play your instant speed card in response.
Yeah, I mean that honestly that is a good point. You know, Ian just kind of thinking, yeah, I need anything to do. But looking like a little bit of a misstep here from Ian, he decided not to use his Orc army to block Bradley's, and then also decided that he should draw a card off of, you know, this Castle Lockthwain. So it ends up that Bradley's Orcish Bowmasters is going to take out his army.
All right, so Ian Friedman finds himself with the One Ring. This is a way to climb out of the resource disadvantage hole. However, it's a lot different between playing a One Ring on an empty board versus playing it in the face of overwhelming board presence and an active Orcish Bowmasters. So you already mentioned, Noah, this is not a damnation deck. There's no single card that Ian Friedman can find that gets him out of this sticky situation. Instead, he's going to have to piecemeal a lot of well placed, you know, fatal pushes, Shouldreds, whatever it might be. And they have to come fast because he is really under pressure.
This is looking like it might be March of the Wretched Sorrow to take out this Orcish Bowmasters and gain Ian some life.
Ah, I did not know Ian had access to that card. It's a 2 of in the sideboard. Very cool.
Yeah, I mean, really important one there for Ian to have, right? He can't really activate this copy of the One Ring in the face of an Orcish Bowmasters. And you know, he doesn't have enough cards or resources in general to do anything but activate the One Ring right now. So incredibly important removal spell for him to have there, but he's not quite out of the water yet. You know, Bradley has these three power threats in play, and they're going to be attacking really soon.
Boy, this match has been so tight all 3 games, coming down to these mid-range situations where it feels like anyone can still win. Game started with a mulligan to 4 from Ian Friedman. He got thought seized on turn 1, 3 cards to work with.
Yeah, I mean, if Ian can win this game on a mulligan to 4 after getting thought seized on turn 1 for the only card in his hand that gave him any sort of, you know, card advantage or, you know, card parity in this sort of matchup, I think that just goes to show how strong his deck is in these sort of matchups. You know, that he built his deck with these Rakdos Evoke decks in mind. So, you know, all those things considered, I think that, you know, maybe maybe it was okay for him. Like, I don't know if I agree with each individual one of his mulligans, but I'm kind of understanding a little bit more why he was choosing to mulligan, thinking like, hey, like I don't need that many cards necessarily to win this matchup because the ones that I have that are good are so potent and so good. So a little brave, but seemingly strong.
Nice little sequence from Bradley. He thought seizes away a grief, then uses the Dothy Voidwalker to cast the grief. It does mean missing out on the 3 points of damage, which are quite meaningful. But honestly, Noah, like I think Ian's in a winning position now. This is amazing.
Somehow, I think I agree with you, Reed. The only problem is from Ian's position, uh, Bradley has a copy of Terminate in his hand. One of the only 3 of his clean answers to Shieldred. And that is exactly why he chose on this previous turn, instead of increasing the clock by attacking with his Dotty Voidwalker, to remove the Thoughtseize from Ian's hand. So yeah, Ian could have a Shieldred here, but Bradley's ready to answer it.
All right, so you set us up well, Noah. This is the reason that Bradley worked so hard to take Ian Friedman's discard spells away. He answers the Shieldred cleanly. Now a dashed Ragavan coming in for 8. That threatens lethal with the burden counters on the One Ring. So Ian might be desperation activate the ring and hope to find his other copy of March of Wretched Sorrow. Is there anything else?
I think that might be his only outrage.
What a match. Holy smokes. That is Bradley Brown winning with Rakdos Evoke over the bigger mono black mid range, dispatching our #1 seed. Really great tight match. All 3 games, there were points where I thought Bradley was totally out of it, but he is able to claw back and just scrape over that finish line. Really nicely done.
I mean, you said it yourself, Reed. It's just impressive work here from Bradley and his Rakdos Evoke deck. Really knowing what his deck needs to do in any given matchup. Trying to play to his strength. You hate to see it if you're an Ian fan. It's been easy for me to fall in love with this mono black deck over the course of the weekend. The interaction between the Shieldred and this One Ring, really really nice to see. But congrats to Bradley for ending up taking it down and securing his spot into the top 4, and also getting that invite to the regional championship. So big congrats to you, Bradley.
Yeah, no doubt.